He didn't just ruin my life, he laughed while doing it. Sitting in that grand, high-ceilinged courtroom, my father-in-law leaned over with that sharp, cruel smile I'd grown to despise. "You can't afford a lawyer, darling. Just sign the papers and walk away with nothing." The judge was about to rule in his favor, stripping away my home, my savings, and my dignity. I was completely alone, terrified, and outmatched. Everyone in the room thought I was finished. But right before the judge could hit the gavel, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. High heels clicked against the marble, but it was the towering figure in a bespoke navy suit behind them that made my father-in-law's smile instantly vanish. My brother had arrived. Before you see how this total takedown unfolds, hit that subscribe button and comment down below which city or country you're watching from. Let's get into it. My name is Clara Vance, and at 27 years old, I thought I had everything figured out. When I married into the prestigious Vance family, I believed I was stepping into a life built on unconditional love and shared dreams. But it didn't take long for the golden gates of their estate to feel like a cage. My father-in-law, Richard Vance, wasn't just the head of a multi-million-dollar real estate empire. He was a master manipulator who controlled everyone around him, including my husband, Julian. For years, I stayed quiet, putting up with the subtle insults and rigid rules, telling myself it was all worth it for the sake of our 4-year-old daughter, Lily. Then came the night that shattered my world completely. I accidentally uncovered a hidden paper trail, proof of Julian's reckless infidelity and massive financial embezzlement from his own family's firm. Realizing my daughter and I were being built on a foundation of lies, I gathered my courage and filed for divorce. I expected anger, but I didn't expect total warfare. Within 48 hours, Richard stepped in to shield his son. He completely froze all our joint bank accounts, canceled my credit cards, and locked me out of the family home. With cold, calculated precision, Richard looked me in the eyes and made a promise. He would use his endless fortune to brand me an unfit mother and ensure I never saw my daughter again. Suddenly stripped of every dollar I had, I packed what little I could into 2 suitcases, grabbed Lily, and moved into a cramped, drafty one-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. I took on 2 low-wage jobs, working late into the night just to keep a roof over our heads and afford a local budget family lawyer. But Richard's cruelty knew no bounds. He launched a campaign of psychological warfare designed to break my spirit. His team of high-powered, expensive corporate attorneys bombarded my lawyer with endless frivolous motions, forced depositions, and endless delay tactics, deliberately driving up legal fees to drain every remaining cent of my meager savings. Day by day, I watched my bank account dwindle to double digits. Then, the ultimate nightmare hit. It was 9 p.m., the night right before our final custody and asset hearing. My phone rang. It was my lawyer, his voice sounding oddly rushed and detached. Without warning, he informed me that he was withdrawing from my case immediately, citing a sudden, vague conflict of interest. The hesitation in his voice said everything. Richard had bought him off. Panic seized my chest. I was scheduled to walk into a courtroom in less than 12 hours, completely unrepresented, facing a wall of shark attorneys who were ready to take my daughter away. Sitting on the cold kitchen floor of my apartment, tears streaming down my face, I realized I had only one desperate option left. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 6 long years. The morning sun felt merciless as I walked up the massive stone steps of the county courthouse. My heart was pounding like a trapped bird against my ribs, and my hands shook violently as I clutched a single, thin manila folder against my chest, containing nothing more than a few handwritten notes and copies of my pay stubs. As I rounded the corner toward courtroom 302, they were already waiting for me. Richard stood at the center of a half-circle of 5 sharp-suited attorneys, looking like a king surrounded by his guards. My ex-husband, Julian, cowered just behind his father's shoulder, staring at his expensive leather shoes, unable to look me in the eye. When Richard spotted me walking up alone, a slow, predatory grin spread across his face. He stepped forward, casually smoothing the lapels of his custom suit jacket, blocking my path to the heavy oak doors. Look at you, Clara, Richard sneered, his voice dripping with condescension so loud that passers-by turned to look. Did you really think you could challenge my family? Look around. You're completely empty-handed. He leaned in close, his cold gray eyes locking onto mine as he whispered the words designed to crush whatever resolve I had left. You can't afford a lawyer, sweetheart. You should have known your place. I swallowed the lump of terror in my throat, straightened my spine, and looked him dead in the eyes. I didn't say a single word. Instead, I glanced over his shoulder toward the polished brass doors of the courthouse elevator, silently counting down the seconds in my head. The bailiff called our case, and we filed into the sterile, quiet room. Richard and his army of attorneys glided smoothly to the petitioner's table, setting down thick leather binders filled with carefully fabricated evidence meant to portray me as an unstable, financially unfit mother. I sat down at the opposite table completely alone, staring at the empty wooden chair beside me, my knees trembling beneath the desk. Judge Miller peered over his reading glasses, his stern gaze landing squarely on me. Mrs. Vance, he said, his voice echoing in the vast room. I see your attorney of record filed an emergency withdrawal late last night. Are you prepared to represent yourself today, or are you requesting a postponement? Richard's lead counsel immediately stood up, smiling smoothly. Your Honor, a postponement would place an undue burden on my client. Mrs. Vance has had ample time to prepare. We request to proceed today. The judge frowned, turning back to me. Mrs. Vance. I took a deep breath, opened my mouth to speak, but before a single word could escape my lips, the heavy double oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a loud, resounding thud. The heavy click of expensive dress shoes echoed across the marble floor. Every head in the courtroom turned. Walking down the center aisle was a towering man in a dark charcoal three-piece suit, carrying a heavy leather briefcase. He exuded an air of absolute authority that instantly sucked all the oxygen out of the room. I watched as Richard's lead attorney turned around, looked at the man, and instantly turned ghost white. The confidence evaporated from Richard's face in a fraction of a second. It was my estranged older brother, Marcus, a senior managing partner at one of the most feared federal litigation firms in the entire country. Marcus didn't glance at Richard or his legal team as he strode past them. He walked straight to my table, set his heavy briefcase down with a deliberate thud, and turned to face the bench. May it please the court, Marcus Vance entering an appearance as sole counsel for the respondent, Clara Vance. His voice boomed, deep and authoritative, commanding the entire room. Judge Miller's eyes widened slightly. Mr. Vance of Vance, Sterling and Associates out of Washington? The very same, Your Honor, Marcus replied smoothly. And before we begin, I'd like to submit a preliminary motion to sanction opposing counsel. Richard's lead lawyer practically tripped over his own chair as he scrambled to his feet. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. He wasn't listed on the docket. I was retained 12 hours ago, Your Honor. Marcus cut him off with ice-cold precision, immediately after my sister's previous attorney was mysteriously bribed into withdrawing from this case at midnight. An act of tortious interference that my firm is already preparing to report to the State Bar Association. Richard's face flushed a deep, furious red, while his lead attorney swallowed hard, suddenly sweating through his collar. Marcus clicked open his briefcase and pulled out a stack of pristine, blue-bound legal files. Furthermore, my brother-in-law's team claims my sister is financially unfit to raise her daughter due to her lack of assets. However, they seem to have forgotten that marital assets under state law include all income generated during the marriage, income that Mr. Richard Vance illegally funneled into offshore shell accounts to evade both alimony and federal tax obligations. Marcus dropped a thick ledger onto opposing counsel's desk with a heavy snap. Inside that file, Marcus continued, lowering his voice into a deadly quiet murmur, is a full forensic audit conducted by my firm over the last 6 years. It details offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands tied directly to Richard Vance's firm. If we proceed with this custody hearing today, every single one of those documents will become a matter of public record, and I will personally deliver copies to the IRS by noon. Richard's high-priced lawyers huddled in a frantic, whispering panic. Their supreme confidence had completely vanished, replaced by sheer, unadulterated terror. Richard's lead attorney practically threw himself toward the bench, his hands trembling. "Your Honor, we request a brief recess to confer with our client in chambers." Judge Miller looked at the blue-bound files on Marcus's table, then back at Richard's pale, sweating legal team. "Granted," the judge said, banging his gavel. 15 minutes. Inside the small, private consultation room, the dynamic had completely inverted. Richard, the man who had terrified me for years, sat crumpled in a chair, looking broken and aged. His high-priced lawyers surrounded him, frantically explaining that if Marcus presented those forensic audits to the federal government, Richard wasn't just facing financial ruin, he was facing federal prison. Marcus stood beside me, tall and unyielding, as Richard's attorney slid a blank sheet of paper across the table. "What do you want, Clara?" the lawyer asked, his voice completely devoid of its earlier arrogance. I looked at Richard, then at my cowardly ex-husband, Julian, who couldn't even meet my gaze. The fear that had paralyzed me for months vanished, replaced by an overwhelming sense of clarity and strength. "First," I said, my voice steady and unwavering, "I want full legal and physical custody of Lily, with sole decision-making authority. Julian gets supervised visitation, only if he passes mandatory drug screenings." Richard flinched, but his lawyer nodded rapidly, scribbling down the terms. "Second," I continued, "you will sign over full ownership of the family home to me, free of any liens, along with a fair child support agreement that reflects your actual global income. And finally, you will pay every single cent of my brother's legal fees." "That's outrageous," Richard choked out, finding a brief second of his old rage. Marcus leaned down over the table, placing both hands flat on the wood, his eyes locking onto Richard's like a hawk. "Sign the agreement today, Richard, or my firm files the federal disclosures at 1 o'clock. You have 2 minutes to decide." With shaking hands and a soul-crushing loss of pride, Richard took the pen and signed his name on the line. The kingdom he built on intimidation had crumbled in a single afternoon. Walking down those courthouse steps beside Marcus, feeling the warm afternoon sun on my face, I took the first truly deep breath I'd had in years. The terrifying ordeal that was meant to crush me had instead revealed a strength I never knew I possessed. That night, 6 years of silence between my brother and me evaporated over a quiet cup of coffee. I learned that Marcus had never stopped caring. He had simply been waiting for the moment I was ready to let him back in. Reconnecting with him didn't just save my future. It healed a deep rift in our family and gave my daughter an incredible uncle she adores. Today, Lily and I live safely in our home, surrounded by peace, stability, and genuine love. Looking back, Richard was right about one thing. I couldn't afford the kind of lawyer money buys. But he forgot that love, loyalty, and justice are things his millions could never purchase. I'm so grateful you stayed to listen to my journey today. I'd love to hear from you now. Have you ever had someone completely underestimate you, only to realize too late who you truly were? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to click the video on your screen right now for another incredible story that I know will leave you speechlessly amazed.